Hello, welcome back to another CPaaSAA Talk, and I'm excited to be here today with Jacques Klick of Sinch and Andrew Collinson, my good friend at CPaaSAA, heading the research there. And we're going to talk about Sinch's research on AI, agentic AI, enterprise AI, that they released a couple weeks ago in June, I think. Jacques, why don't you give us the headline? You did a ton of research amongst a ton of enterprises and found some really interesting and surprising results.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rob. So my name's Jacques. I work at Cinch. I run market strategy, and one of the areas that I kind of oversee is our overall broad research, market research, customer research. And so at the beginning of the year, I was really interested to see how are businesses implementing AI when it comes to customer communications? How does it differ from what we're hearing in the market from other industries that are using AI and implementing it? And we did a study, 2,500 enterprise decision makers across a bunch of different personas. This is like CIOs, CSOs, CMOs, working across 10 different countries. But the one qualifier we had was they had to work at a company that was sending more than 1 million messages every single month across messaging channels or email or voice to basically understand, how are they using this technology? What are the issues that they're running into? Where's the investment going to be going? And so we just found a ton of really great insight. And to be honest, we kind of got some insights that we didn't expect. When I
Those are the
scoped it,
best.
yeah, well, I scoped it back in January, and my back then the whole headline around AI, particularly around agentic AI, was that everyone was stuck in pilot mode or experimenting. Right? McKinsey did this big study of all this agentic stuff is stuck in pilot mode, and Gartner was predicting that half of all the projects were going to die in proof of concept or get rolled back very quickly. What we found actually was that 62% of leaders we surveyed, they already had AI agents live in customer communications. So actually messaging real customers, not in a sandbox. That's seeing that the adoption was actually quite settled. But then the other interesting insight that we found was that about 74% of those companies that had shipped some kind of agent into production had to roll it back. And we can get into all the examples of why they decided to roll back. Some of it has to do with governance. Some of it has to do with, the model going off and sharing personal identification data that it shouldn't have. But just a really interesting thing to see that actually in customer communications, we're the tip of the spear when it comes to AI implementation. People believe in it. They see the value. They see the revenue potential that an AI agent communicating with their customers can do. But yeah, really, really interesting.
Did you get any insight onto how they had implemented these agents? So, have they done it by themselves? Have they done it in experiments? Have they done it with folks like yourselves or systems integrators? What was the kind of split of who done it?
Yeah, usually it's a mix, right? I mean, a lot of times people do come to CPaaS providers to help them implement these types of solutions. So they'll work with us, and sometimes we'll implement a professional services agreement to help them structure those agents as well. Sometimes it's through a systems integrator. When you talk about doing it themselves, yes, it was surprising to see that a lot of these actually are. And that was another key insight from the data is what we found. 84% of their internal engineering capacity was going to building the actual guardrails that make sure these agents are not running off and doing things that they shouldn't and communicating or going outside of the governance prospect. So when you do it yourself, I think in one hand it's great because you get more control over that process. But one thing the research is identifying is like you're spending a lot of that internal engineering talent and capability and time, which costs money to actually build that stuff.
Do you think the customers you talk to are kind of very much the leading edge of this, or do you think they're more kind of? I mean, because clearly there are 1 million messages a day, so they're doing quite a lot. Um, or do you think they're, where do you think they are in the market? Do you think they're a long way ahead of the market, or do you think they're kind of average in the market from what you see in the rest of your experience?
Yeah, some are more mature than others. Actually, an interesting way of looking at this would probably be in the actual rate of rollbacks. So
Mm.
some customers had significant rollback rates. I would argue that is actually a sign of maturity. It's not that they built systems that were faulty, it's that they actually had the systems and the maturity to be able to catch when an agent did go off the rails and communicate something that it didn't or shouldn't have, when it shared personal identification data that it shouldn't have. That I actually see as a sign of maturity. And the biggest question I would have for customers who are saying, oh, we've actually put live agents out there and we haven't had to roll back anything is, well, if the agent did go off the rails, how would you
How
know?
would you know?
How are you
Yeah,
measuring
where you're
that?
looking. Yeah.
Yeah, were you looking in the right places? Because if you think everything is fine and dandy, there's plenty of evidence of super mature organizations that are catching these things. And this goes beyond enterprise communications, right? We see, you look at the cyber implications of AI and the incidents that you're seeing with OpenAI and Hugging Face, where an agent is getting out of its own sandbox environment and actually hacking into another company's environment. So the cyber aspect of this is not immune to communications, and I think is super relevant to when we think of, it's not just something that you can put an agent into your scenario and expect that it's going to just remain in the rules that you set for it.
That's really, really
So
interesting.
Andrew,
Just thinking about the agents, can you give us a sense of what they were doing? So, are the majority of them like chatbots, sort of kind of autonomous chatbots, like working in text, or are they an AI voice, or are they doing stuff behind the scenes? What do they actually mean by an agent in this respect?
It's a broad mix. I mean, I think the biggest indicator that we saw in the research is that it is a lot of live chatbots and it's AI voice. I think what you're going to
Mm.
start to see in the coming months and the coming year is truly cross-channel agentic capabilities. So you're speaking to one agentic interface that has the context and the ability to orchestrate across an email conversation, a voice chat, a live bot, and a messaging channel, right? If we think about the rise of these very advanced OTT channels in the future. But today, the research that we did, it does seem like it's very contained to single channel usage, right? It's very hard to create that orchestration layer across the multi channels. There's a lot of connective tissue you need to build. There's a lot of things that you need to build in terms of the context layer and maintaining that customer record, whether you're using a CDP or you're using a provider like Sinch to help you do that. So that's obviously the opportunity for CPaaS providers, right? Is to fill in that gap and make it easy for customers to do that. But the reality is it's very single interface today. And so a lot of these customers are mostly worried about how is that AI agent working within that single channel. And it only gets more complex the more channels that you add.
Mm.
so Andrew, hearing this against our AI voice research report that we launched in, I don't know, Q2 somewhere, what lines up and what is the biggest surprise for you?
Um, well, bear in mind, our research was based on interviews with people in the industry. So, and looking around at what people were doing rather than talking directly to enterprise, and also to some extent looking at case studies. So, what's interesting about this is the depth to which it probes actual usage in enterprise, which is why I'm asking these questions. How is it different? Um, I think I think that going back to Jack's point about guardrails is really interesting, because I think one of the questions in my mind is to what extent customers are going to think about governance, guardrails, making things work well as their core IP. So, we have to do this as our business in order to remain competitive and successful, and it's part of our secret sauce. Or that they turn to folk like Cinch and other players in the intelligent engagement space, as I see it, to provide that insight. Because I've always thought, or like I always thought it's probably too strong a word for it, hypothesis is that's one of the places you can provide value. Because if you've done this for thousands of customers, or even hundreds of customers, or tens of customers, you're still going to know more about it than someone who's only done it once, although you're going to know less about their particular instance. So I think one of the big question from an industry point of view is, where is the sustainable space for different types of players? Do folks like Cinch and intelligent engagement players really, is there a space here you can own and defend against some of the larger players, and also against the do-it-yourself approach? I mean, to some extent, you can never stop the DIY, nor would you try. But you have to, how do you prove that you're better than DIY and better than the kind of more generic approaches, I think is a really interesting angle.
Yeah, I mean, I want to come back to the voice stuff specifically because I think there's some interesting stuff in our data. But I think to me, a pattern I've noticed from this research, but also as someone who speaks to a lot of our enterprise customers, when I ask them about AI agent costs, they're talking to me about, oh, model licenses or usage or platform fees that they're spending. But then when you get deeper into the conversation, they start talking about the actual internal engineering capacity that they're throwing to implement these things. So that DIY model, it's a lot of overhead when you come to like the actual engineering sprint teams that you're putting to launch these things. And again, the complexity of orchestrating across multiple channels, the unified context. So when you're asking like, what is the role of CPaaS players like Sinch, it is to fill in that gap. It is to make sure that companies don't have to spend 84% of their engineering talent on that, and who are spending more than half their time on basically plumbing, masking customer data, rate limits, retry logic, audit logs. Over a third of them are spending their time there. So to me, it's a question of, would you rather invest in a platform that can unify that for you, or do you want to spend that money on the labor cost of your engineering talent to go build that stuff internally? Software costs are shrinking as you scale, but this one is actually growing, right? Because every channel, every agent, every new market that you add, it's another layer that someone has to maintain forever. Because it's not just one thing to build the guardrails and to build the governance structure for these agents to interact. It's the maintenance on top of it. It's the tracking of when things go wrong and the analytics for every interaction that happens across your platform.
So fundamentally, it's about essentially knowing how to do it well and having that embedded in how you approach the problem with the customer, approach the solution with the customer. And that sounds like there is mileage in that.
Yeah, I think so.
So you're going to say something about AI voice, Jack?
Yeah, because I think
what did you see in that?
When I read your report, right, I think we're kind of describing the same issue, but from opposite sides. You're coming at it from the industry perspective, case studies. You're asking questions like who's running the conversation, who's orchestrating the models, enforcing the policy, all of that. I think our survey kind of answered the present tense, which is today, nobody, right? So, or whoever drew the short straw on the engineering team, like they're responsible for figuring all that stuff out. And so I think a lot of what I was reading your report, like the runtime that you describe, that's tickets as a backlog right now. Again, all these engineering teams that we surveyed, they're spending half their time building that stuff by hand. And then on voice specifically, what the data that we saw, I mean, I don't think any of us are skeptical about this idea that voice is really going through a renaissance. It is just absolutely the channel that I see the most growth potential, especially with AI. But 2/3 of the enterprises that we surveyed, they now rate voice equal to or above messaging in importance. That would have sounded crazy 3 years ago, right? And 41% of them are pointing to fully autonomous call handling as the single biggest opportunity that they see in the market. So that's like true enterprise decision makers who have experience interacting with customers across all these channels, basically saying that voice is the biggest investment piece for them. And I think we all see that potential, right? This is where a lot of us are investing at the CPaaS layer, but also all the other ecosystem players, the 11 labs, the Google voice models, and things like that are a key partner in all of this.
No, I think it's really interesting. I mean, what kind of industries are those companies in? I mean, because what intrigues me is, what is the trigger that allows you to think or enables you to think, yeah, I can entrust my entire voice business to agentic voice? What did you get any insight on that?
I think it would surprise you that this is actually, I mean, we kept the survey targeted to mainly the 5 to 6 core industries that we know we service the biggest, right? So it's financial services, it's healthcare, it's retail, technology, and telecom. But it's not surprising that voice is equally being seen as an opportunity, even in those regulated industries, even in financial services and healthcare. And so that's really interesting because you would think, oh, because of, let's say, HIPAA compliance regulations, voice is a little bit trickier and vendors want to stay away from that in the healthcare space. It doesn't seem to be the case. I think people are expecting that vendors like Sinch are going to help them solve that problem and protect customer data and protect the information. And they're expecting that models will do the same and that agents will have that. So it ups the stakes for the vendors because the appetite is there even in regulated industries.
I'd say I understand what you're saying, and I wouldn't say I was surprised by the industries or the spread. I guess the bit there's still a question mark in my head is, at what point do you entrust value to a human in the chain?
Mm,
And obviously that
okay.
changes
Yeah.
over time. And are there places where this is never going to happen? Or actually, because I'll give you an example. You hear a lot of anecdotes about these kind of spaces. So someone said to me, in the UK, the healthcare profession is really happy about recorded calls because it provides evidence of which is protective and supportive of compliance. And they said, but we find it really difficult to sell in the States because it provides evidence of what happens in the call and therefore ability to be sued on the back of it. Now, honestly, I thought, well, that's quite an interesting insight. I have no idea if it's replicable and true. So there's a lot of kind of fog of war coming out of at least the anecdotal side of it. And I wondered if you'd seen any trends in that in your research.
Not in our research specifically. However, I think more broadly, when we think about how we're approaching our product development, the human in the loop aspect is foundational. I think everyone recognizes today that I guess it is tangential to the research, right? Because when we're talking about the rollbacks that we're seeing and the reasons why these agents are having to be rolled back, every single time that happens, it's almost a reason and validation right there that you still need the human in the loop. Do I believe that will always be the case? I, it's hard for me to think so, right? Given the vast advancement that we see in these models, and the ability for them to take on more challenging outputs. But it does feel like for the next 5, 10 years, yes, there will still need to be someone on the human level who's kept in the loop. And so for us, when we're thinking about how do we build a platform that's actually going to integrate that human in the loop, what are the key components that you need to have there, right? It's rigorous analytics, right? That your platform is feeding to that human of what happened, why did it happen, how did it happen? And then it's the context, right? You're in a middle of a support issue that a customer has. The agent has run out of options, or it doesn't know how to solve this problem, or it messed something up. Now it's routing to the human. How do you quickly bring that human up to speed to save that customer support interaction? So it's the context that suddenly has to be brought into the fold. So I think the human in the loop for the foreseeable future, there will need to be someone who can review those analytics on a regular basis and continue to understand and improve, given the scale of adding new channels and orchestration and all the complexity that comes with that. It's sort of like, I think, using any LLM tool, right? Yes, you can go into Claude and prompt something and get a really cool output back, but there's still that final human tweaking before you would share that output with someone seriously, right? It's that last mile
Sure,
delivery,
sure.
I think, is still critical.
I'm
I guess
thinking as
also
I'm
part of what
listening
you
to
need
the two
as
of
a
you,
sorry, Karen.
I'm thinking
Sure, Rob.
about, let's say, the role of the CPaaS platforms, right? The CPaaS providers. And we've talked about that at our event last year in Amsterdam. We're talking about it at CASA 26 in September again. Where does CPaaS go, right? What's the next act of CPaaS? I think was a discussion I had with Jonathan Bean last year in Amsterdam. So what's that next act? And when you think about, of course, it's all about AI and intelligence and something with that conversation, right? So the communication becomes conversation, becomes intelligence. So we're talking about moving up the stack. That's sort of the core of the AI voice research that we put out earlier this year. But then when I think about it, and I've been having this conversation a couple of times now in the last couple of months, I mean, the communication is still an integral part of that conversation at intelligence, right? And the trust that you need to have in that conversation. And we talked about regulatory aspects here. I mean, as CPaaS players, I mean, you know all that regulatory stuff. I mean, your business has been for the last 20 years or whatever, to have that regulatory footprint in all the countries in the world, basically, because that's sort of the idea of CPaaS, numbers and voice and messages and how it works, and you take away that burden. Now, when you think of AI, we're moving into another trust and regulatory space with AI. There is local regulation coming out. I mean, Europe now has the AI Act that came into effect recently, and different parts of the world are going to. Is that also where you see that the role of the CPaaS platform um, um, uh, grows actually? So not just the regulatory part of the communications side that you've been doing forever, but now also on the AI side, what's possible, what's allowed in different countries, what are the preferences in different countries? Is that also where you see your future?
Yes. I mean, the long answer, short answer is absolutely. And it's already what we've been doing, right? So pre AI, that stuff was critical too. So having a customer support model with boots on the ground and experts on the ground in local regulations so that you could advise a client proactively of an impending change to how they need to send marketing communications via SMS, right? That's all the stuff that we have on the ground today. I think the future is how we templatize that into the agent and developer tools. And so what I mean by that is a lot of the work we're doing right now, and every company is trying to do this too, is figuring out how do we integrate into tools like where we know developers are going to be using. So Claude Code or Cursor or Windsurf. So IDE tools, but also app building tools. And then what you're trying to do is templatize the actual communication expertise that you have. So, for instance, how do you set up an RCS messaging campaign? There's a lot of steps that companies need to go through. And so today, that's a human person helping some company register and set up and figure out what are the different aspects that you need to have for images to put into a carousel for an RCS message to get delivered and it looks good. Templatizing all of that so that it becomes a skill. And so now a developer who's connecting into Sinch and wants to set up an RCS campaign, they can download the Sinch skill for doing that RCS campaign and now prompt in natural language, this is my idea for a marketing campaign. Here are my design aspects. I need you to make sure that this is going to get turned into the right kind of output that I'm looking for. So some of that is going to happen through that like packaging up of our expertise into agentic tools. And we're already launching a lot of this. A lot of this is live in production today. We're going to have some really exciting things at the end of the year that we can showcase on this as well. I think also some of it is packaging up industry use cases. So, particularly with regulated industries, helping healthcare companies understand the best way to set up an agentic workflow for the common issues that they're looking for. A good example of this, we created these conversational AI packages so that we took basically common use cases. Let's take a bank. Loan recovery is a huge issue for banks. It's really tricky. It's a difficult conversation to have with a customer, but it's has a huge impact on revenue. And so we created a conversational package where any financial services company can answer a couple questions about their business, but they can set up that package and it works and it's industry standard. So some of that is just templatizing the industry expertise that we have from working with the top companies in the world and the most advanced companies in the world. And we have a whole professional services motion set up today. So again, it's humans doing that work, but we're increasingly productizing it, templatizing it, and actually launching it into our platform. But I think I want to get back to what you first started with too, which is this idea of moving up the stack, because I think that's super important too. Like there's no doubt that us as a CPaaS provider, we are thinking about how we move up the stack. But what I don't want to lose sight of is exactly what you said, the importance of that communications infrastructure, the network at the core of all of that. You know, in this study that I did and the research that we did, we evaluated every single provider and basically had them rank, you know, what are the most important things when it comes to AI success? What's the most important thing? And out of 4,000 different variable pairs, it was actually how enterprises felt about their communications infrastructure that gave them the largest confidence in the success of the AI agents working across communications. So that tells us, right, a story that people care about reliability more than AI feature sets or
Mhm.
pricing of this new stuff. So the burden is on us to, yes, move up the stack, but ensure that the messages still get delivered, that they don't fail, and that we're providing the best experiences. And it's not just messages, it's across voice as well, making sure that the latency is super low so that people have a more human-like experience on that voice channel. Or it's an email where, it's not enough to get delivered to someone. It's about delivering to their inbox, right? So that you're not hitting the spam folder. That's a lot of the expertise that, again, we can provide. And that's infrastructure. That's not necessarily AI.
I love it. We're out of time. I'm sorry. We could talk for another hour. I'm sure it is really interesting stuff. Thanks for sharing some of those insights from your research and explaining where Sinch is going to. I look forward to continuing the conversation in Amsterdam in September at our CASA 26 event, and I look forward, Andrew, to you incorporating this latest stuff in the next edition of the AI
Absolutely.
Voice Research Report later this year as well. I think it's exciting times. There's a lot happening, and I'm glad to see, let's say, the first glimpse of the next act or the third act of CPaaS here with you guys. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Jack.